There are lands that man preserves untouched in their primordial state. One such place is the Kandalak State Nature Reserve. A journey across even a section of it, the islands of the Kandalak Gulf, will help you to understand why this territory is so carefully protected, from whom, and most importantly, why. The reserve is located in the north of Russia, in the Murmansk Oblast, on the shore islands of the Barents and White Seas. In order to get to the Kandalak Reserve from Moscow, you have to travel 1,700 kilometers. The most convenient route is by train. It will take you about 30 hours. The nature here is harsh but varied. On one small island, you can encounter forestry and lakes, marshes and cliffs, meadows and streams. Spring in the Kandalak Gulf usually comes in April. In May, however, small islands of snow can still be found in the forests. The reserve's inhabitants have to hurry. The summer is short in these polar latitudes. They have to strengthen up and raise their descendants. On the harshest of cliffs, in brutal winds and weather, incredible flowers grow. Often it's not clear where these plants get the strength. No ray of sunlight energy and no bead of dew goes to waste. A good sign that spring has arrived is when the anthills come to life. It's only on the first sunny days that you can see so much hustle and bustle on the surface of these forest castles. Although the Kandalak Reserve is beyond the polar circle, you can find over 2,000 different species of insect here. But there are very few reptiles here, only common lizards. The largest populations of mammals on these forested islands are rodents. This baby squirrel is just over a month old. It's the bravest in the family. His brothers and sisters are still sitting in safety in their nest, while he's independently exploring the surrounding world. Everywhere you find tracks of hares. They're having something of a celebration now. Finally, after the long winter, they needn't only eat hard bark, they can treat themselves to buds, grass and fresh shoots. The hares have to keep their eyes out though. Foxes often come to the islands. True, during the warmer times of the year, they search for easier catches. Thanks to their keen sense of smell, they can easily find nests, and sometimes along with a batch of chicks, they'll even eat the bird that's rearing them. If this predator has settled on one of the islands, then there's little chance that the other inhabitants will be able to save their offspring. You can also find an unusual hare here, a bearded seal, or laktak, as the Palmors, the inhabitants of the Barents and White Seas, call them. In the spring, frequent guests of the reserve are Greenland seals, who come here on the way from their place of birth to the Barents Sea. It's their pups that were in the recent past culled for their precious furs. Now, however, a complete ban has been placed on hunting these defenseless animals. The real masters here are the birds. At the Kandalak Nature Reserve, there are about 260 different species of bird, and for the most part, they're marine birds. In the spring, in the forests, on the shores and on the lakes, you can see mesmerizing courting rituals. Some males carry out complex dancing competitions, while others try to attract partners with expansive territories and impressive outfits. Bright-coloured featherings crop up all around, and everywhere you can hear bird calls. Our nature reserve system in Russia, or in the Russian state, is already over 100 years old. At the beginning, the reserves were organized to preserve the most precious animal and plant species. Both kinds. Our Kandalak Reserve was created in 1932, and it was also intended to maintain and increase numbers. The problem was that the precious fur of birds, as it were, was eider down. Eider down, which eider ducks use to insulate their nests with, is springy and light, and most importantly, it preserves warmth very well. From the end of the 16th century, people began actively using this precious natural material. They also never missed the chance to collect eggs or to shoot the females. As a result, the eider almost entirely disappeared from the shores of the White Sea. Thanks to the Kandalak Reserve, however, the birds were not only saved, they were also allowed to recover their numbers. An interesting characteristic of the White Sea is that the water level is continually changing. Where we can see wet sand now, in a few hours' time there will be a splashing layer of water that's 2 meters deep. During the flood tide, the seawater in tumultuous flows heads for the lakes located on the islands. It's as if it knows that thousands of years ago these water bodies were also part of the sea. But in just 6 hours, the flows will start to move in the opposite direction. The section of the seabed that's freed up during the ebb tide is called the littoral. Only those who have been blessed by nature with special adaptations can live here. For example, the brown focus seaweed recovers even when it's been entirely dried out. The bubbles on these plants help them to keep themselves on the surface of the water. Various creatures live on the seaweed, feeding off it. During the ebb tide, mollusks cover over their shells and wait for the water to return. These Balianus crabs do the same. They also attach themselves to stones, pieces of wood, and one another, and no storm is capable of prizing them free. A multitude of sandworms during the ebb tide dig in, leaving funny piles of sand in their wake. Of course, this wealth of appetizing critters can't go unnoticed. The littoral is something of a marine dining table for numerous animals. For certain birds, it's actually their main source of nourishment. The wagtail has to be careful. Its plumage isn't entirely suited to tossing and turning in the waves. Like the thrush, however, it finds it difficult to resist the temptation of the wealth of insects to be found under rotting seaweed. Even certain flowers have adapted to life in the sea. When there's a lot of salt in the soil, the roots have trouble absorbing water. Sea asters, however, have not only learned to live on the littoral, they even blossom underwater. And they're by no means the only example of the exotic in this polar environment. The summer. It's a short but vivid burst of green. Life beyond the polar circle continually confronts plants with winds, the cold, and other challenges. That means that they can't boast giant flowers or blossoms, flamboyant appearances, or aromas that can be sensed meters away. Nevertheless, all the flowers of the Kandalak Islands are so refined, delicate, and joyous that you can spend hours admiring their restrained beauty. Polar flora is the Calypso bulbosa. It's astonishing, but in the north you can encounter several different types of orchid. They're all very rare and included in the Red Book of Russia. These small, unremarkable flowers have a very cunning characteristic. At the foundations of their thin stems, butterwort leaves are flattened out. Like another predatory flower, the sundew, they're covered in a sugary slime which is very attractive and appetizing for little insects. A midge or a mosquito flies up to have a snack, but then can't fly away, getting stuck to the leaf. The biosphere's territories have to be preserved in their primordial forms, but it's also important to understand how our planet is constructed, where man has had a minimal impact on natural processes. A journey across the islands of the Kandalak Gulf will introduce you to the incredible variety of the natural environment of the north of Russia and help you to find out what's hidden behind the strict borders of the Kandalak Nature Reserve. Why are these territories being conserved and how are they studied? The subject of my work in the nature reserve is the ecology of mass species of gulls. I began work in 2009, having graduated from the Petrozavodsk University. The work includes yearly reports on the archipelago of the Poria Bay, and this is a continuation of a series of observations carried out over many years in the reserve. During the winter, an analysis of all the data that's been collated during the field season is carried out. Of course, sitting in the office for 3 months is pretty hard. And everyone's impatiently waiting for the start of the new season. For me, it begins in March, when the Gulf gradually opens up and gulls start to fly here. In our work, there are some incredible things that a normal person would find it hard to see. You can only see them on television or read about them in magazines. Every year we observe the hatching of the chicks and their first flight. Many people think that in our work everything has already been entirely studied, but that isn't actually the case. Only long hours spent alone with nature allow you to witness the most incredible events. You have to remember, however, that for wild animals, communing with people isn't a joy. It's a matter of life and death, especially where their offspring are concerned. Nature, in gratitude for the respect and care that it is shown, allows the reserve's personnel to discover many of its secrets. In order to understand what's happening to the reserve's ecosystem, scientists regularly monitor all the flora and fauna represented on the islands, even mushrooms and insects. To make the information more comprehensive, the animals not only have to be observed constantly, sometimes they need to be caught. The biologists always do it in such a way, however, that no damage is caused. Alyona Vasilievna, she's got chicks. Ornithologists know how to hold a bird in such a way that it won't be stressed out, and they often talk to them, trying to calm them down. The specimens that are caught are measured, weighed and marked. For example, a ring with an individual number is put on them, and then they're released as quickly as possible. All this information will then be entered into the reserve's main scientific document, its natural record. This book concisely and clearly sets out the information received from all the personnel working at the reserve. Essentially, it's a mirror that reflects the condition of the ecosystems here. When everything has been done quickly and carefully, the female scoter returns to her chicks, and they set off to sea to encounter further adventures. One of the main tasks of all the staff here is to keep tabs on the numbers and the population dynamics of the different species of flora and fauna inhabiting the territory of the nature reserve. As this is a marine nature reserve, then this task also concerns marine birds. The reserve's territory is located for the most part on islands, and groups of islands that can be quite far away from one another. The territory on each section is fairly large, and each member of staff is responsible for several islands. Up to 50, or even 70. For that reason, to monitor the birds, we get school children involved, students and volunteers, because a single member of staff couldn't do this on his or her own. Children from schools across Russia become essential assistants in the counting of the birds on the islands. To find nests, every square meter has to be searched. You have to look in every bush and under every stone. The children are trained and they gather scientific information with a great deal of interest. For example, by judging the size of an egg and its depth in the water, they can work out when the jet will appear. Has everyone seen the chick? Many come back to the reserve again and again. Sergei Strelkov first came as a 13-year-old schoolboy. He's now in charge of a biophysics laboratory at a university in Belgium. Returning to the reserve, however, he takes great pleasure in passing on the skills and knowledge that he gained in his childhood here to later generations. Reserves should work on ecological education. Many people who aren't really linked to nature or biology or ecology, they don't really understand what this is about. For some, it's just about demos or about ecological campaigns, so to speak. It's very important that we let people know how the world around us is constructed, and that we let them sense how it can be protected, how we should interact with it so that we have a minimum influence on it, a minimum impact. One of our reserve's most important spheres of work is inviting in groups, school kids, who come to the reserve's territory and work at our research bases and get involved in the actual process of the work of the reserve's personnel. This allows the guys not only to get some rest, as it were, but also to see how people work and how they can live in the reserve without doing any damage to nature. This is genuine involvement in real nature conservation and scientific work. That's real ecological education. Every year, dozens of children come to the reserve and they come back year after year. Then new kids come. Sometimes the children of people who themselves came here in their childhood come here. If you work out how many people have come through our reserve and got involved in this undertaking, you're already talking about thousands of people. Another important element here is one of the most fascinating events in the summer season for volunteers, the catching of malted ducks on the island's lakes. At the end of June and July, the river ducks begin to molt. In one go, they shed all their flight feathers and they can't fly anymore. The birds are particularly vulnerable at this time, and so they hide out in the forest lakes, where for over a month they will wait until their new feathers have grown out. Although the molted ducks can't fly, catching them isn't that easy. You get a tad jealous of anyone who manages to catch one, although that feeling just encourages you to try even harder to work through the grass in search of another one to catch. But you have to hang on to it and carefully carry it in. Careful, don't get caught on that snag at the last moment. There are loads of them here. Only when the catchers have been around the whole lake can they get on with measuring and ringing. This is when they can look at the birds in detail. Some even get the chance to release a duck. In Russia, the total area of the reserves and national parks amounts to 2% of the entire country. But they're home to over 80% of representatives of the country's flora and fauna species. So, despite the fact that a significant portion of our population now lives in cities, separated off from the natural environment, we really can't live without that nature. That means that we have to preserve it. We have to preserve it, and that's what nature reserves do. I mean, not on a global scale. They preserve the quantity. They preserve a few examples, and thus show us how it should be done.